Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and we have a very fun game that we're going to be going over today, and that is the Nakhmanson Gambit. There's a few ways that you can actually arrive at the position of the Nakhmanson Gambit. Most common way that I've seen in my own games is e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then bishop to c4, getting into the Italian game, followed by knight f6, d4, and then after they take here, castle on the king side. White's going to be looking to give up material, and the only thing that White wants in exchange is rapid development, specifically of the major pieces. The queen and the rook here are going to be heavily involved into the game. And then after knight takes here on e4, the key move in the gambit is knight to c3. Now, I do recognize that they do have to take the pawn here on a d4, and the knight has to take here on e4 for you to be able to play the Nakhmanson Gambit. So you won't always get the option to do this. I will make another video if you would like to see that. Feel free to let me know, and I will make a video on the decline lines in case they don't continue like we want them to. Even right here, they could take with their knight here on c3. We're going to be covering if they take with their pawn, and this position is the best move for them to take with their pawn, but it's also the trickiest and hardest, I think, for them to play. But we're going to be looking at pawn takes here on c3. If you want me to make other variations on the decline lines, or if they take with their knight here on c3, feel free to let me know. But from here, the main line is for the bishop to take here on f7. You can see White's just giving up a ton of material. Already gave up a knight here on c3, now giving up a bishop here on f7. After the king takes, Queen comes up here to d5 and has a very, very strong attack. Now, there's no way for any of the pieces to block this king here, so the king really has four different options. It's going to come here to g6, f6, e7, e8. So we're going to look over all those variations and how White can best attack the black king. So we will go in counterclockwise. First move you could see is king to g6. Seems like the worst, just if you're looking at this. Not sure why they would try to bring their king even further out, but I always like to make sure that we go over all the variations in case you see some terrible moves. From here, anytime your queen can come down and your opponent's king's in the center of the board and you can check them and start to attack, I always recommend that. So queen takes here on e4, check. And then from here, there's not a lot of great options here. If they play king to h5, you can see on the dark squares, those are already blocked off by this bishop here on c1. So that's going to become very, very important in a lot of these variations we look at. But king to h5, just getting themselves in even more trouble. g4 is going to be checkmate. If they decide to come back, well, this isn't going to work either, because knight to g5, this is going to end very, very poorly. They're either going to lose their queen here on a g5 after the bishop takes here on a g5, or they're just going to lose the game. So king to g8, that's going to lose to queen d5. That's going to be checkmate. Or if they play king to f6, again, anytime your king's just in the center of the board and your opponent has so many pieces involved into the action, it's not going to end well. Queen to f4. King's going to have to come over here to g6, and then you just start a massive attack here. Pawn up here to g4, preparing for the queen to come down here to h5. There's just no way to stop this. Maybe if they try with g6, discovered attack with e6. Now the bishop here on c1 is attacking the king, and then it doesn't matter if they get the queen involved into the game at all. This is eventually going to lead to checkmate. So that's not going to be good. Coming back to the very beginning here, g6 is going to be a very, very poor move at the beginning of this opening here. Another option that you could see is king to f6. Now, this is a pretty tricky line to find here. The computer does say this is the best line that black can continue, so we're going to look at a lot of different ways that white can attack this. But even though the computer says it's the best line, does not mean a human's going to find any of the best moves, because who looks at this and says, yeah, I just want to bring my king to the center of the board and just let my opponent just tee off and start to attack all day long? I think it's a pretty difficult way for black to continue. Before we get into white's response, if you haven't already, please hit the like button. Definitely supports the channel, also lets me know that you like this Nakhmanson Gambit, and I will, if we get enough likes, make other videos on the variations for decline lines, as well as some other accepted lines if they take with their knight here on a c3. So if you haven't already, like the video, also subscribe. Hopefully if you subscribe to the channel, I know many of you have, feel free to hit that bell icon if you want to be notified anytime I release new videos. From here, White's going to play rook to e1. If you can't immediately take with your queen and check your opponent, it's always good to get more pieces involved into the game, and this puts a lot of pressure on black. Now immediately you can see this knight here on e4 is under attack. Now one thing black may want to try to do is hold on to this material advantage. We gave up a lot of material. We gave up that knight, we gave up the bishop here on f7, but if they try to hold on to the knight here, it's not going to go well for them. So the really only two options you could see here is d6 and c5. Both of those are going to lose. d6 here, White's just going to continue to get more pieces involved into the game, and it's going to end in a checkmate. So knight to d6 here, bishop to g5 check. Can't really come back over here to f7 or the e file because of the queen and the rook here. So it's going to come to the king side of the board and eventually end in a checkmate. Knight here to h4 check. Bishop here to e7. This is a discovered attack. Yes, you could end up taking the queen, but it just feels nice telling your opponent that you don't have to win the game. Those are the nice moves that I like in chess. So yes, you could take here on d8, but this is nice as well. So really from here, it's just them blocking, but it's just a waiting move. Eventually you are going to win the game. Queen here to g5, and this is game over. Now, if we come back, instead of knight to d6, it doesn't matter if they played knight to c5 here. It's going to be the same thing, bishop to g5. At the end, this is going to end very poorly. So we've already looked at this. They're going to lose this knight here. It's pretty much how they're going to continue from here on out. Now, they could see, okay, maybe we want to play bishop to d6, trying to block off some of the critical squares that White's going to go to, maybe get the rook involved into the game here. From here, White's going to play rook takes here on e4. Definitely wants to take this material and get another strong piece involved into the action. This is also setting up bishop to g5, attacking the king. It's protected by the knight here on f3. Everything White's doing is supporting each other and putting a lot of pressure on black. And you can tell from black's standpoint, yes, they are up in material, but they're just blocked everywhere. The light square bishop's not involved into the game at all. This rook here on a8, definitely not involved at all. So yes, White has given up material, but they're pretty much just attacking the opponent king for the rest of the game. So how does black really continue in this spot? There's no good moves for the king. If he wants to get his rook involved into the game, well, this is going to end poorly. This is going to be a mate right here. Bishop to g5 check. King g6, knight over here to h4, king h5, pawn up here to g4, and this is going to be mate. So that's not going to be good. If they recognize that, hey, the bishop wants to come up here to g5, maybe they play h6, but now the threat is going to be after the knight comes over here to h4, White is threatening the queen to f5, and this is a deadly attack here, and so black may try to stop that, and there's a few ways they could do that. The first one would be g6. This stops the critical square here on f5, but then you could see queen to d3. It's not an immediate threat, but there's so many things that White is threatening here. They still can get their dark square bishop involved into the game. The rook can have a discovered attack here with the queen coming to g6. This keeps the threats open for black. And if you look from black's standpoint, the queen's still blocked off. The light square bishop's not going anywhere. Anytime they move something like b6, well, they're just so far behind in development. Getting their rook even involved into the game isn't always beneficial. Now, if they come back and say, I don't want to play g6 because I'm just extending more of my pawns on the king side of the board, it doesn't really look like it's protecting it that much, maybe bishop here to e5. This is protected by the knight, recognizing they may have to give up some material, but then also looking to push forward with d6 at some point. From now, I like the move rook to f4, and the main reason I like it is because it almost looks like you're in preparation mode, especially once you get really good at the Nakhmanson Gambit and you are playing extremely fast, because so far we should be in bookline for your preparation, because hopefully you watch these videos and apply it to your games. You don't have to think very much, but it looks like, why would we play this? they know that they could just take here on f4. And so they may look at it and say, I don't want to take here with my bishop. If they do, that's fine. We definitely have a response for that. But if they don't, they are going to lose right away. So one of the moves they could try is king to... Let's see, if they just come here down to g5, they definitely come into our territory, so that's not good. But rook here to f5, king takes here, queen down here to e4, bishop, and then this is going to be checkmate right here. Now, if we come back and say, all right, what if he doesn't come to g5, because that seems somewhat ridiculous, but bishop here to e5, rook f4, and then maybe they play king back here to e7. Seems like more of a safe square, but not really, because now white can play knight to g6 check. This is also forking the rook here on h8, but it doesn't matter because queen to f7, this is going to be checkmate. So really, they do need to take the rook here on f4, but that's okay because that's what we're prepared for. After the bishop takes, the queen's going to come over here to f5 check. King moves back here to e7, knight up here to g6. This is all sorts of forks, attacking the king, bishop, and the rook here. After the king comes up here to e8, now the bishop can take here on f4, and you still have so many threats that white has. How does black really continue from here? White's going to be pushing his rook over here to e1. All of the major pieces for white are involved into the action. Now from here, the last way they could stop the queen coming over here to f5 is if they play knight to e7. Difficult move, I think, to find, but in this case, I would still bring the queen back here to d3. Now, this is all if they play that bishop to d6. Now, the computer thinks the best line is for black to play knight to e7. I think this is a near impossible move, unless you've watched this video or studied the opening in general, for black to play. Yes, it is attacking the queen. That's fine, but this blocks the dark square bishop and the queen. The light square bishop we already know is blocked. The king's in the center of the board here on f6. This is an extremely difficult line to find here. Because the queen's under attack, just go ahead and take right here. You already have a very aggressive rook here on e1. You're going to be playing bishop to g5 at some point. How do they really continue from here? They could try to open up with their pawn, so maybe pawn to d5, and then you have queen to f4 check, maybe bishop to f5 blocking that. If they play knight to f5, well, this is a huge mistake because queen to g5 check, and they're going to lose their queen. That's not going to be good, but sometimes they don't know the best line to do this, especially if you're playing a blitz game or something. You're going to see this knight to f5 move, and you're going to capture the queen here on d8. But let's say they play bishop to f5. Okay, well, that's fine. You could probably not g4 because they have the move queen to... after g4, they could play queen to d6, which I think is pretty good. But the move you do have is knight to d4. This still keeps a lot of the threats that you're looking for in play. You can start to bring your rook involved into the game, your bishop involved. You still have your queen to g5 at some point. Eventually, you could play rook up here to e6. The bishop is being pinned down by the queen. So knight here to d4, I think, is the way to go. If we come back a few moves, if they don't play d5, maybe they play d6. Same thing, queen over here to f4. Main difference is if they play bishop to f5, I think in this case you can play g4. The queen can't come down here to d6, which I think is the best variation for black to continue here. And so white still has a lot of good threats here. If you look at black's standpoint, it's really difficult to look at this and say, I feel really confident in this position. I feel good about winning this, even though they have a minor piece advantage here. This is tough. Also, they could just lose that because this bishop right here on f5 is being pinned down. All right, so we've looked at king to g6. We've looked at king to f6. The next variation we're going to look at is king to e7. This is a pretty terrible move. Same thing as before. We're going to go ahead and take with our queen here on e4 and check. And then how does black really continue here? Not a lot of good moves. If he comes to f7, well, now knight to g5 is a killer. Same as we saw before. They're pretty much going to lose their queen. Queen comes down. We take with our bishop right here. If they don't have any good options for their king. King here to g8, this is going to be checkmate. And if they come down here, maybe king to f6, well, this is eventually going to lead to checkmate. King to f4, king's going to start swinging over to the king side of the board. And the same mating pattern that we had before, this is eventually going to be checkmate. So if we come back and say, what if they don't come to f7? What if after here they play king to f6? Well, now bishop to g5, and this is just losing the queen. After they come here, you don't have to take right away. They're still in between moves because they have no good way to defend anything you're doing. So queen to d5 check. Now if they bring their queen back or king back here to e8, now you can take their bishop. King to d8. Now you could play knight to g5, just threatening even more moves. Knight to f7 check. This is forking the rook here on h8. You can swing your rooks, get them involved into the action. Everything's going to be looking up for white in this position, which leads us to the last variation that we're going to be covering in this video. And that is if they play king to e8. Now, this I think is the most logical move for black, but still, it's not all that great and very difficult for them to continue. Now, in this spot, so this is the only time where I'm going to recommend not taking with your queen here on e4 and instead playing rook to e1. You are going to capture this material back. I just don't think you need to take it right away. Now, the thought is eventually once you take with your rook, you're going to play your bishop here to g5 and put a lot of pressure on your opponent, get your other rook involved into the game. So knowing that our bishop could come here to g5, they could say, well, let's go ahead and stop that and play an immediate h6. Well, unfortunately, this loses. This is going to be checkmate right away, so keep that in mind. You could play queen to h5, and then after king to e7, then rook takes here, knight to e5, rook here to e5. This is eventually going to lead to a checkmate. They can just chase you around the board here or try to move you around so you have to chase their king around the board. But eventually this is going to end in a checkmate. Pretty cool checkmate if you haven't checkmate your opponent like this in the game. Maybe you get a chance if they try that in the game. Now, h6 is definitely a mistake here, so you won't see that all too often, but something you could see is d6. Knowing they can't hold on to this material here on e4, they may play d6 to try to open up the board for their light square bishop to get involved into the game, because for the most part, all variations in the Nakhmanson Gambit, this bishop here on c8, this rook here on a8, they're not doing anything. But if you see this, first move is go ahead and take with your rook here on e4, put your opponent in check, and start to attack. Now from here, bishop to e7 makes a lot of sense. Bishop to g5, attacking the square right here. And then from here, you could see a lot of options. Maybe they decide to start attacking here, take here on b2. Go ahead and bring your rook over here to e1, just lining everything up on the e file. If they come down here, take, okay, that's fine. You're just going to swing your rook back here to e1. You have so much pressure on your opponent. It can be difficult for them to deal with. Now, if we come back and say, what if they don't take here? What if instead they play h6? Well, then I would just go ahead and take here on e7. That's fine. They take with their knight here. You could play queen to h5, putting a lot of pressure on your opponent. You're going to be playing rook here to e1. Very, very difficult for them to continue from here. Their queen's blocked off. Their rook here on a8's not doing anything. White has a very aggressive stance. Now, if we come back a little bit more and say from here, what if they play king to f8? Because maybe they want to have this bishop move freely and not be pinned down by this rook here on e4. Well, White's going to continue with rook over here to e1 and says, yeah, we want to get our material involved into the game. We don't really care if you take our bishop right here because that's going to lose. That's going to be checkmate because after knight to g5, there's no way for black to stop the checkmate from here. The threat of queen to f5 or to f7 is too real. Can go ahead and take the rook here. Still threatening the same thing. Queen up here to f7. Eventually, maybe bishop to e6. They may have to take with their queen here. But at the end of the day, it's all going to lose. It's going to end up in a checkmate. So if we come back, that was if they played d6 early on. Another thing you could see is, okay, rook to e1. I'm just going to play bishop here to e7. You're still going to take with your rook here, preparing for bishop here to g5, and there's not a lot of good ways for them to stop that. If they look at this and say, yeah, I want to stop that with h6, this is the critical square here you're trying to come to, you can actually just take with your bishop here on h6. They can't take with their rook. This is going to be checkmate here on g8. They also can't take freely with their pawn here because queen to h5, king over here to f8, and then rook to f4, bishop has to stop it here, and then queen to g6, threatening taking here with the rook here on f6. So maybe d5 opening up for the light square bishop, but then rook takes here on f6. Again, so difficult to stop. They're going to lose their queen, and white's just going to have a very, very good attack. So they can't really stop the bishop coming here to g5 here. So other options, if they play rook to f8, well, then queen to h5 check. If they want to stop this, you could take material here on h7. You're just destroying their king side of the board. If instead they say, we're going to play d6, trying to open up again, you never know how your opponent's going to address this, but many times you just want to get material involved into the game here. Well, now bishop to g5, as we talked about. If they take material, same thing. You're going to be coming over here to e1. Come down, you're going to exchange material, but eventually you're going to be bringing your rook back here to e1. So that is the Nakhmanson Gambit. Try to go over as many variations that you may come across, especially in the accepted lines early on. If they take with their knights here early on, I want you to be prepared for how you're going to continue. Bishop takes, king takes here, queen comes up here and comes to d5 and starts the attack. So that's pretty much everything you're going to see. But let me know what you guys think of this video and the Nakhmanson Gambit. Try it out. Let me know what you guys think. It's always fun to chase your opponent around the board. And there's real no counterattack. There was no lines that we didn't go over. It was like, well, if they do this one thing, they have a pretty strong attack against your side. White's just going to be attacking, and as long as they know how to continue with their attack, black has a tough time. There's so many mates that they can fall into if they don't know the proper line. So thank you guys so much for watching. Again, if you haven't already, please like the video. Trying to spread the word about these fun gambits, especially these chess opening videos that I'm making. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.